Well, Rick, you know your birthday is coming up. And it's a biggie.
Yeah, it is.
It's
big 6-0.
6-0. And I wanted to get you something special. So I booked Mitch Weissman. And you know Mitch Weissman.
I do.
And you're going to love him. Our listeners are going to love him. But you'll have to wait till after this.
Okay.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Men Celebrity Interview with Rick and Dave.
It's time to do another interview, Dave. And you know how excited I get when we have a Beatles-related interview, and we've done quite a few of them.
Well, you've done a couple. You never tell me when you do the Beatles. So I had to book this one in order for me to get on it.
Well, this is a treat. It's not actually Paul McCartney, but it's a pretty close facsimile. Please welcome to the show the man who played Paul in the original cast of the Broadway show Beatlemania, Mitch Weissman. Welcome, Mitch.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I hope you enjoy this podcast. I'm waking up with the rest of you. Here we go.
Yeah,
we love waking up the musicians at it's 4:30 your time right now. No.
Yeah, whenever you.
Well, that was the old days, but right now I'm just waking up like a regular human being. It's fine. I have to go to sleep early.
So the original Beatlemania show was a huge hit on Broadway. It came out when the Beatles reunion actually was still possible. I mean, John Lennon was still alive, not living so far away in the Dakota there in New York. And
right.
You actually met John and Yoko a few times, didn't you, Mitch?
Yes, I did. I mean, I lived on 74th Street off Central Park West. They, of course, were Dakota on 72nd. I had not seen them in the neighborhood, but eventually I met them 3 different times. As I describe it, the first time shaking head to toe, the second time waist to toes, and then the third time goofing on them. But we became, acquaintances. And the story that a lot of my friends tell me I'm an idiot for is the very last time we met, I was sat on the stoop with them in front of the Dakota, and then they eventually asked me up for tea, and I said, no, thanks. I've got things to do.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
I had nothing to do except that, as far as I was concerned, the relationship was growing from each time. And the last time was a nice 20-minute conversation about everything from Double Fantasy coming out to the Playboy article to things like that. And then eventually, and I just figured this was going really well. I'm not going to push it. So this was in November, just before he was killed. So it was crazy, So I stayed in touch with Yoko for a few years after that, but I haven't in a lot of years. But they were very, very nice and very, very funny, and it was great. It was a lot. It's nice to have made inroads into a nice relationship. Yeah.
So none of the Beatles ever saw the show, but their family members did, right? I read a ton of stuff.
John told me that Julian had seen it. And the very first time we met, I was walking from the hardware store to the supermarket back to my apartment on 74th Street, just off Central Park West, and I was coming up Columbus Avenue, and they were coming down Columbus Avenue, John and Yoko in a third person. And in my mind, I'm wearing my aviator prescription glasses. You're going out like a woman in curlers going, please God, don't let me meet anybody I know. So you're 2 years ago, bell bottoms, whatever. So, I mean, I'm walking down the street with all this stuff in a bag, curtain rod, shelf rods to put up shelving in my apartment. And I hear this voice boom out, well, good morning, Paul. How are you, Paul? And in my mind, I'm seeing them coming towards me. I'm going, holy shit, it's John and Yoko. And about the holy shit part gets out of my brain, and that's when he said hello. So they stopped and talked to me, and whoever he was with, they said, he said, "Oh, good morning, Paul. How are you, Paul? Look, honey, it's Paul." And she's like laughing, and he says to me, my son. He says, "You're still doing it?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "My son, my 16-year-old, saw the show and said, Dad, the guy who plays you doesn't look much anything like you, but the guy who plays Paul looks just like him. You got to see him. You got to see him." And he was just very, very nice. And eventually, he actually said we might, to his friend, we should use him on the television thing we're thinking of. And I just said, I live down the block. And he goes to me, "Don't worry, I know how to find you." And when they walked off down Columbus Avenue, this was right after a snowstorm, so the place looked kind of magical and white. And I look around, there's no one on the street at all. There's no one. So it turns into a Jerry Lewis moment. And I'm looking up and down the street. There's nobody there. I'm racing down the street to my house, and I get to my apartment, which is 5th floor walk up. And I get to the top, and then I turn it to Lou Costello. Yeah, I mean, my then partner was saying to me, "What's wrong?"
Calm down, Lassie. Lassie's in the mill. What's going on?
I think the one word I could get out was Lennon. But it was so. Then I met them a few times kind of after, and of course the last time was the 2 weeks before they were killed. So, but they were very, very nice and very friendly, and always concerned. That he always used to me, "Are you still doing it? Are you still surviving?" The very last thing he said to me before that I left was, "Are you still doing the show?" I said, "Yeah, I'm trying to get out." He says, "Well, let's be fair. It's still to a Beatle. It's just as tough to get out, no matter what scale it's on." So I said, because I had said to him, I said, "Well," he said, "I really can feel for you." I said, "Well, let's be honest. The scale's a little bit different." He said, "Nope. Once you're a Beatle, it's just as tough to get out." And,
wow.
And, it was very nice. And of course, then I turned down the invite to tea. But what can I say? I was just trying to be a nice guy and not crowd the situation.
But didn't Paul's in-laws see the show too?
I don't know. The Eastman, everybody saw things, and the Beatles tried to stop it for years, and it didn't get stopped. What didn't help it was later on the Bus and Truck shows, which were big, massive shows still, and had projections and screens, but they didn't have as much multimedia, so it turned into a more or less like a Beatle concert, some footage. Whereas the original show, which we did at the Blackstone and we did at the Schubert Theater in Chicago.
Oh yeah, right.
Which was great. That when we left in California, we came right to the Blackstone, and it was great. Right in 1978, right after the riots. Pretty crazy. So, but we had a wonderful run there. But the show started to wane down into like touring bus and truck companies. So the Beatles kind of filmed those performances and showed that it was more of a concert as opposed to a multimedia experience. So the lawsuit went on with the suing, and the legal entanglements went on for years until 1985 when they got an injunction. And that happened, and I was speaking to David Krebs. The show was produced by Steve Lieber and David Krebs. That happened because at one point in time, the Beatles actually sent the judgment saying, "We want to become partners with you guys, and for $1 million cash settlement, we will give you the rights to any future performances." And when I saw this, Lieber and Krebs called me in the office, and in my mind, I was sitting in my 30s, and I'm going, "This is great. We can actually do the solo years. We can do whatever we wanted to do." And the insurance company that handled the lawsuit turned the offer down. And when the offer got turned down, they hired another set of lawyers who promptly lost the case, and the Beatles got the injunction. Because the judge's decision was, even though this was, questionable, however you want to put it, they had a disclaimer, a 6-point type, not the Beatles, an incredible simulation. Yeah, I was an expert witness for the show, where Larry Iser, who was the Beatle attorney, asked me to come meet him, so I came in and he put a tape recorder down on the table and said, "You mind if I tape this?" And I took mine out of my pocket and went, "No, you mind if I tape this?" So we both went back and forth across the table. I said, "I'm a lawyer, kid. If you want to see my scrapbooks and everything where the public says we're the Beatles, but we don't, or the interviews where the guys in the company are just happy to be playing Paul and John and George and Ringo, you can't. The show has indemnified itself. So if you want this," so I made him subpoena my scrapbooks for over $1,000. Made him do this, and they promptly asked for a settlement. The second set of lawyers didn't ask for my scrapbook, didn't ask for anything, and they lost the case.
Oh,
I spoke to David Krebs last year, the producer. He said, "If we knew it was only $1 million to continue the thing, we could have taken it out of our pockets."
Yeah.
But that's the problem with compartmentalized management. Lieber was handling Beatlemania, Krebs was handling Aerosmith, AC/DC, everything else, and he never realized it. So how a lawsuit like that can get lost in the shuffle is beyond me.
Yeah, no kidding.
I had a nice run, and I was very happy. So not a problem.
It was a college intern, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Some guy.
I got a really great paid internship, which is good. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you about what it was like being Paul? I mean, I've known a few Elvis impersonators in my life, and something happens to them when the lights come on. They become Elvis in their minds. Did that happen to you when you were playing Paul, or was it just a role? Did you always
It was an acting role for me. I mean, I was a musician before, and then a little bit of an actor actually before I was a musician, or full-time musician. But I ended up, to me, it was just a role on stage. I mean, I hung it up when I left the stage. I put it on when I got to the stage.
Yeah.
I didn't live it off the stage. People, they wore their Beatlemania jackets and all the other cast members and stuff. I didn't wear any of that stuff. I mean, I figured I had the face. That was enough.
Yeah, me too.
Even Lawrence Juber and I laughed about it when he first met me. He said to me, you don't look anything like him. And I gave him a big hug because we became friends from that point on. Because, it's an approximation. And, of course, it was pretty close. If you get the right camera angles, it's like, oh, even that goes, is that me or him? So it was an interesting time. I mean, I always thought of myself as me. I didn't try to go out and become noticeable. I didn't wear my Beatlemania stuff with me to draw attention, but I had enough of it. It was.
But I mean, even John saw you as Paul when he saw you on the street. He recognized that, right?
Yeah, and as I said, my hair was not brushed or whatever, and I was wearing aviator glasses. He saw right through it. Like, well, because so. He was always very nice about it, and people recognized me. And I had some pretty funny experiences, and there were times before the show opened, and nobody knew there was another guy that I would be chased down the street. Like I got chased from Sam Goody once at a record signing thing for some other band.
Wow!
Down the block, like Hard Day's Night, literally running for my life back to the theater. And, and those days, I mean, I didn't have contacts yet, so I had prescription sunglasses, which were, when Lennon met me, they were my regular glasses. But if I wore my aviator prescription glasses, the resemblance was pretty uncanny, as they used to say. So people would just wave, say hi, hear hi, Paul, all the time. Gene Simmons and I were recording. I was down visiting them. They were recording an Electric Lady, and Say, Say, Say had just come out.
Yeah.
With Paul and Michael. And as we're walking to the store, people are yelling, "Hey, Paul!" And Gene's going, "It's Gene." They're going, "Hey, Paul!" And going, "It's Gene." And I looked at Paul. I looked at Gene. I said, "I don't think you're not Paul Stanley. This thinking it's me."
Yeah, right.
So, and he laughed so hard he ran back to the studio to tell the guys. They just all thought I was. They were calling to Mitch, but I thought they were talking about you. So it was pretty funny. I mean, there's a lot of you get a lot of people saying hello to you, which wouldn't ordinarily say hi to you.
The same thing happens to Dave whenever there's an Uncle Fester.
Yeah, right. When
really?
The Jackie Coogan convention.
Yeah, whenever there's Adams family.
The Christopher Lloyd convention.
Chase him down the street.
It's just so heartbreaking when I have to disappoint everybody there.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So, needless to say, your resemblance to Paul was probably a big part of the reason you ended up getting the role, I'm guessing.
When I walked in, Kenny Laguna, who's Joan Jett's manager and friend and keyboard player now, he's still with her, and he was doing the auditions. And then when I walked in with another friend of mine, Jules, who he went to audition for Lennon, and they were single auditions, so there weren't a lot of people. There weren't callbacks. We had, as Joe Pecorino said, the John Lennon from Broadway said, when I came in, and there were all these different era Beatles sitting in the room for the callbacks. But I went in there, and they asked me to sing, Can You Do Yesterday? And can you do, and I came on acoustic guitar, and I looked very much like McCartney and Wings in 1976. I hadn't seen his haircuts. I had longer hair like Jimmy Page through all my band days on Long Island and stuff with Jimmy Crespo from Aerosmith and a bunch of other people. I had decided to just get myself a haircut, but I went in there and I did a part of Yesterday and part of Get Back, and Kenny is writing furiously in his notebook on his legal pad. And I have no idea what he's writing. So eventually when they called me back, I eventually saw what he wrote. He was just writing, looks just like Paul, sounds close. And he kept writing over those letters all the time, like 100 strokes of pen on everything. Like he just kept writing over it and over and over it. So they asked me, would I come back? And what was funny was I had a drummer friend who was starting a tour of Godspell up in Rhode Island. And I said to them, no, I can't come back. And it was frantic on the phone call. Steve Lieber, the producer, saying to me, what do you mean you can't come back? I said, I'm booked that day. So he said, can you come in the morning? So yeah, that was a long day. I came in the morning, did my call back, and drove my drummer friend up to Rhode Island, where I got him up there at midnight, and then drove back home. So it was, we didn't know what it was for. We all thought it was for a commercial or something. Nobody said it was for a Broadway show. Oh,
really? You didn't know that it was a Broadway show?
No, the original ads were the kind of like somebody had repitographed or made a copy of like the Hard Day's Night cover in black and white. And it's on top of it appeared, said, wanted musician, singers, musicians, Beatle lookalikes for unique opportunity, call Mrs. Price at a New York number. And I remember my friend Andy Esposito, still my friend to this day, he was working at Sam Ash Music in Hempstead on Long Island. He called me and said, there's a flyer here. So he said, you should go do this. And I had a friend from Pittsburgh, Carl Griffin said, who owns Pittsburgh Guitars, or he did. He dragged me to the audition. That was, as much as I was a musician and performer on stage, I was very shy. I did what I did on stage, and then it was just me off stage. So he dragged me, and that's how the whole thing started.
Wow.
Yeah. I was reading the list of songs from the original show, and
right.
Most of them are Paul songs. I mean, that must have been pretty hard on your voice doing that every night.
It was. The original show's songs were like 36 of them. It ended up at 29. They took out If I Needed Someone. They took out Taxman. Took out a few other songs, and the reason that happened was because George Harrison decided he didn't want his songs in the show. He owned his publishing. I remember with the fiasco with Dick James selling McLean Music, George still owned his because he wasn't part of the catalog. So he asked for his songs to be removed while we were still in rehearsals. When the show opened up and became a smash, he sent his lawyer, I think Bruce Graykel, or that was either Ringo's lawyer, but he sent his lawyer back to say George would like to know if he'd like the songs back in the show, and the producers went, no. So that's why we don't need his songs now. Yeah. So that's why there were no Harrison songs in the show. But that was the reason they came. Lieber and Krebs had pulled high schools, looked at music radio station playlists from PLJ and stuff like that in New York, and saw that the most popular Beatles songs during that time were mostly, a lot of them were McCartney vocal songs.
Yeah.
Probably going off of the radio hits format. Right. I mean, I don't think, Strawberry Fields probably wasn't a very big radio hit, but we all know it's a killer song.
Right.
So they kind of tailored it that way. And to tell you the truth, my voice didn't catch my face in 1978. I mean, I started doing maybe 5 performances a week before I started sounding a little bit hoarse, or much to the amazement and luck of destiny, McCartney's live albums came out. Wings, Over America, and Beatles released the Hollywood Bowl, where you heard McCartney throw your voice. So I'll never forget, his manager came to see the show, and he said, you sound just like Paul live. And I went, I have no choice. I'm going to give it all like, thank you. You sound just like him. Thank you. So the understudies, or the alternates as we called them, Reed Kaling, he would perform on maybe 3 out of the 8 shows a week until my voice would rest it and come up there. They put us up when we performed the matinee performances on Wednesday, Saturday, and Sunday. It was like Shea Stadium, because that's when all the kids would come. All the school kids would be bust in, and there was a constant low roar. There's a line in McCartney would go in the Hollywood Bowl, "Can you hear me?" And the place would go nuts. And I would do the same thing to hear the audience go crazy. We would look at each other and start laughing. The monitor systems were terrible. I mean, not any, certainly better than what they had at Shea Stadium. Because John has been asking me, how do you do so many shows a week? I said, well, we have monitors. He goes, no, it can't be. Because, and they had nothing.
Right.
So we had, I had vocal problems for a little bit of time. And then eventually, as I say, my voice caught up with my face in 1978. I was able to perform all of the shows. So it was a learning lesson as well. I mean, it was the greatest singing lesson ever, because she did the same songs over and over and improved upon them every time. Yeah. So it was really great. Yeah.
So you're right-handed by nature, right?
I'm actually left-handed by nature.
But you played guitar right-handed. Is that?
Yeah, I played guitar right-handed because back when you're 1960, whatever it was, there were no left-handed guitars available for anything. I mean, I was brought up playing French horn, which is a left-handed oriented instrument. I switched over to school system to mellophone, which is right-handed. So you have different fingerings. I had funny conversations with John Lennon about that, since he was a French horn player. And I did that through high school. And then eventually when it came time to play guitar, my parents got me a right-handed guitar. And that's how I learned. Although when I was a kid and miming to the Beatle records like everybody else in the neighborhood, in the basement, I had the 10-track and I'm strumming it lefty because that was my natural inclination. When we did the show, they got me a left-handed bass and a right-handed bass. And what I would do was I would rehearse. But if I got, and the tough part wasn't the figuring out the fingerings with my right hand. So performing lefty, it was hitting the right strings with my left hand. Total uncoordination to try to hit the strings. If I had taken a guitar and learned the broad strokes again and learned to strum and learned to do whatever, it would have been fine. But you'll see me in the commercials playing left-handed, and that's me miming to the stuff I played right-handed. But I'm actually playing the notes if you watch it because I learned how to play it. But it's a little bit stiffer performance. So in rehearsals, if I got lazy, I would take the left-handed bass, flip it upside down, and play upside down righty. And eventually the show opened and I played now here's a brilliant thing. Multi-million-dollar production. They had left-handed Hofners and right-handed Rickenbacker. So I would play the show lefty and righty, depending upon what the use of the bass was. And that was confusing my brain big time.
Oh my God, yeah.
And the reviewers came in Boston and on right-handed nights. And once they said, once you get past the fact that he's right-handed, it really doesn't matter. It was very nice reviews and stuff. He's great. And so I went to the producers and said, I'm going to perform righty. So there's footage of me playing lefty, but I performed the show mostly after Boston. I did lefty and righty on Broadway for a while, but then I just stuck to righty because it was just more natural. And over the years, other McCartneys and other people in different Beatle bands said, why don't you play lefty? I go, I'll leave that to you guys. I'm perfectly fine. Yeah. I have enough of an issue with identity. I don't need to go lefty. Yeah. And yet when I was a kid, I could only bat left-handed. I could play dolls in both directions. That's to do with the ellipse, I guess. But I could still only bat, lefty. I wrote with my left hand in school back in the 60s. They took it out of your hands, sign of the devil. You learn how to write righty. So I do things right-handed.
Okay.
And some lefty. It all depends when it comes out. Yeah.
There have been a few Beatlemania cast members that went on to become famous in their own right. Marshall Crenshaw played John, right? Glenn Burtnick, who joined Styx.
Styx and the orchestra. He did, like the Electric Light Orchestra thing.
Yeah, right.
Version called the orchestra, right? Exactly. Yeah.
Al Sapienza.
Al Sapienza is one of the funniest and talented guys I know. He started out as a Ringo, and now, of course, he acts in everything. So he's been the mobster for years on everything.
Yeah, he was Mikey in The Sopranos. For those of you,
exactly.
Yeah, he's great as an
he's
actor.
fantastic.
I love watching.
Oh, you see him? Yeah, you're right. You see him all the time getting shot at. With a tracksuit or whatever.
He's in Beverly Hills Cop. He's in. I think he's in Air Force One. I mean, he does a lot of, Army stuff, military guys, and for years he did a lot of Lifetime, Italian roles, usually mobsters. He's in a bunch of different TV shows. He had a wonderful arc on, what was the show that Kevin Spacey had where he was the big series,
House of Cards.
House of Cards. He had a big, wonderful arc in that. He has an arc. He was in Suits, which now that it's streaming again, I will have to watch it because I never saw him on Suits. I didn't have cable.
That's a great show, by the way. You should check that out.
Amazing show. I watched the first bunch of seasons. So now I can't wait to see where it goes. And when I saw Meghan Markle, I went, I know this girl.
Right, exactly. That's right. She's in that. So, those guys all became famous, but you have done a bunch of stuff where you worked with other bands in the studio, on the road. Tell us a few of the highlights of your post-Beatlemania years.
You already talked about Kiss.
Well, when I was doing when I was with Lieber Krebs, I mean, the management was AC/DC, Aerosmith, a whole bunch of different bands, and I actually I'm singing on Kings and Queens off of Aerosmith's. I forgot what was it done? Night in the Ruts? No, that's not it. That was the one that came after one of their albums, and uncredited stuff, and then a few other artists. But eventually, what happened was I ended up in the studio with Kiss, writing. I wrote with them. Paul Stanley and I met at a party. Pepe Castro, who was in the Blues Magoos and Barnaby Bye, and a band called Balance, which had a hit in the '80s called "Breaking Away." Pepe's still around, making tons of music and writing musicals, but he had a party on July 4th weekend in a townhouse he lived in Midtown. And so everybody went to the party. We all showed up there, and I met Paul Stanley for the first time then. Oh, actually, it's not true. We met Kiss in 1976 during rehearsals in New York. They came into the room at SIR Studios in New York, and they sat down in front of us, Paul and Gene. We knew they were somebody, but we didn't know who, because there was no published photos. So eventually they told us, and then they picked up the song list and said, sing. So we sang for 4 hours with them. And Peter kept running in saying, "We're going to rehearse yet?" They would go, "No." I mean, eventually it was funny. All six of us just looked back and said, "No, Peter, not now." Because he kept running in. Ace was in the other room wondering where everybody was, but he was happy with the booze and the catering. He told me later on, but he kept wondering, the guys make me come down here, and then they're not even in the room.
It's a nice buffet.
So, it was pretty good. But we met them for the first time, but I hadn't seen him since 1976. Actually, no, they were doing a tour in '77, so they had us come to see them at the Garden, and I saw them after that. But Paul was at the party, and we met, and we talked for a bunch of hours. He gave me his phone number and said, "Call me." And then almost very comically, I woke up the next day and went, "I can't call him." My then wife said, "Why not?" I said, "It's Paul Stanley." I said, "You just spent hours." She said, "You just spent hours talking to him." I said, "Yeah, but I can't call him. It's Paul Stanley." And I'm not a Kiss freak or fanatic, whatever it was, but I was just kind of intimidated by in my level, I was famous for whatever I did, but I didn't put myself in the same category of, a professional musician like that. So a year goes by, and
this is another John and Yoko not going up to the
hammer. He offered you tea, and you said, "Forget it, Paul. I don't like tea."
Yeah, he said, "Call me." So a year later, same party, and there he is. And he comes up to me and says, "Hey, how are you?" I said, "Fine." He said, "How come you never called me?" And I tell him the story, and he laughs and he punches me in the shoulder and says, "Don't ever do that again." And from that point on, we were friends, and Gene and I and stuff. So I was writing with them when things would come. Say, "You want to try to work on some songs?" And we did, and nothing happened, and nothing came out. Our relationship was based on the friendship, as far as I was concerned. But they said later on in an interview, you write with friends, and then you don't use the material, and there goes the friendship. They're all gone. He said, we had this, and I remember the phone call. I got a phone call from the record plant in L.A. They were working on what turned into Creatures of the Night. And they called me, and I was on speakerphone. And they were all going, "Hi, Mitch, hi, Mitch." And Paul goes, "I hate to tell you, but we're not going to use any of the songs you wrote." And apparently my response was, "Bummer. So when you come back on Tuesday, where are we going to dinner?" And the whole room just froze. They went, "Did you hear what we said? We're not using the songs." I said, "Yeah, that's fine. I don't care. That's fine. I mean, it would be nice, but where are we going? Where are we going on Tuesday?" So that endeared me to them, and that's kind of the way I am. I have a lot of friends in the music business that started out as a possible business relationship, but evolved into just friendships instead. It doesn't pay the bills, but it makes me feel good. I mean, it's my ulterior motives have never really been that way. It'd be nice if something happened, and usually when it's right, it happens.
Right. So
that's how I ended up working with Kiss, through the friendship relationship. And then eventually, I remember Paul, when Animalize came out, had 3 co-writes. They actually said to me, "What did you eat this year?" or something, because these songs are great. I said, "Well, you forgot we wrote them together." But thank you. I mean, there's a couple of songs that I've done with Gene over the years where I wrote almost the majority of it, and he felt guilty. There's a song called "What You See Is What You Get," which is actually going to come out this year on a tribute record, unreleased material of ours. And at the time he said, "I can't use this. I didn't write any of it." I said, "Yeah, you did. You wrote part of it." I said, "Let's make a deal." He said, "I can't take yeah, the writer's share. I say, yeah, you can. If you take 50% of the writers and I give you 50%, you give me my publishing, it'll work out just fine. But the song didn't make it on the record, which is a shame because now it'll come out and won't make any money anyway because of streaming and everything else.
You're going to get the 0.04 cents
unless somebody re-records it, puts it in a movie, it'll be fine. But other than that, no. But they were really great friends to me. If things drift off, I still will get an email from Gene occasionally if I email him. Paul and I haven't spoken in a while. But from there, it led to a lot of stuff. The China Club in New York, which there was one in Chicago as well, and there was one in L.A. I performed at the one in Chicago a few times. I had a band with Joel Danzig from Hamer Guitars, which Hamer is located outside of Chicago. So we opened for Cheap Trick a few times downtown. We played the Metro.
Oh, cool.
I played at some outdoor festival as well. And it was a lot of, we played what's the rock and roll place near the rock and roll? Near the Rock and Roll McDonald's, there's a big.
Oh, the Hard Rock Cafe.
It could be the Hard Rock now. Yeah. I'm not sure what it is. It was something else. If the Hard Rock took it over, it makes perfect sense.
Okay.
But played there a few times, and then NAMM was there in NAMM all the time. So Chicago, I love Chicago, and the Beatlemania run at the Blackstone was great. Also at the Schubert. So Chicago feels like New York to me.
Yeah, I saw the show at the Blackstone.
Yeah, I saw it there.
It was great. So tell us about Joni Loves Chachi.
I was in New York. This was, I guess, 1982, I think is when it aired, when we were doing it. I was in New York.
I blacked out that period.
Yeah, exactly. So somewhere in that range. I can't remember now, but I was still, what was great was it was, a great time to live inexpensively. Because these 70s were the 70s. That was the days of 1 week's salary equals your rent.
Right.
When you're making Broadway money, your rent is covered for a couple of years, especially if you don't spend it. And I knew at 23 years old that this isn't how you start your career on Broadway, and in a very recognizable role. And I also realized that I'd probably be typecast like Carol O'Connor, like those guys. Of course, they had more money. John Travolta, any of those people that got typecast at what they did. And I wouldn't work for a while after Beatlemania. And I didn't because everybody thought I was English.
Oh, that's funny.
And everybody thought I was a Beatle because everybody else who had tried to shop for deals they were very Beatlesque sort of people. And I remember having meetings with record company presidents, and we're meeting them in clubs saying, yeah, I don't need to listen to your demo. I know what you sound like. I'm going, no, you don't. But, you can't argue with them.
Yeah.
And the Kiss stuff actually legitimized me because I still look like McCartney. And this was the 80s. So I had leg warmers. You're wearing, I didn't have the headband, but and I still had my Beatle haircuts. And I was actually doing Beatle shows around the world and around the country. So I still had kind of a Beatle haircut. I actually ended up having the worst mullet ever because I would just take my long hair down my back and then shove it in my white collared shirt. So, and I'd have a Beatle haircut, and then at the end of the show, I'd shake my hair out and feel like, look here. So it was the worst haircut ever.
Hey, no judgment. We're both former mulleters,
right?
So
it worked for the time. But I did, the music stuff worked very, very well, but what legitimized me was the Kiss stuff because people would look at my face and then hear the music. I remember when we were there recording Animalize, I would be visiting the studio because, I'd saved a lot of money with Beatlemania, and I also went back to working in graphic design, which I did before all that stuff, and I just didn't want to keep spending my money. So the guy from Broadway was now working in the bullpen in an art studio. And all the kids would rush to answer the phone because the people calling me were Paul Stanley, Gene Simmons, John Waits,
right.
You name it. And they all wanted to answer the phone. Yeah. And it's funny because, you have those sort of friends. So why are you working in a studio? Because you have to work. What's wrong with that? Just because they're your friends doesn't mean they're going to pay for you. So, so I worked, but I go in the studio and I'll never forget it's like a movie moment. One of these kids at the front desk says, you come here like every day, but what are you doing here? And playing through the control room door is Get All You Can Take, one of the heaviest tracks on Animalize. And I say, you hear that song? And they go, yeah. I said, I wrote that song.
Yeah. Wow.
And they look at the Beatles standing in front of them. Then they hear the Kiss song coming out of the control room. It was like, really? It legitimized me in the terms of, holy crap, you could do something more than just be a Beatle. So, and then after that, I got to work with a lot of different people through the China Club, through through meeting people and performing on stage with them, creating the jams. When I created the jams, it was always like a music minus one thing. I don't know how old you are. You said 60.
Yeah.
There was a guy in New York, Floyd Thaxton, who used to sing songs. Yeah, he would be miming to the songs or sometimes singing them. When I would do put these bands together, I would have pretty much all the foreigner, but be missing Mick Jones wouldn't come, so I'd play the guitar parts. I had all these great musicians, they'd be missing, so I would be the front man. And I'd be the host, and I did it all gold with the underture of music playing. So stick around, we'll be right back. And the music would come up, the lights would go down. So it was a really fun time, and I got to meet so many people that way. And I ended up, doing different projects, different things with different people.
But Joni loves Chachi.
Yeah, so you
to get back to that. I got that because I was sitting. I talk about Tangent Man. That's me, Tangent Man. We were off somewhere else. So I was sitting in my apartment. I get a phone call from Randy Clark. Randy Clark was the second John Lennon on Broadway. And he says, I'm sitting in Paramount Studio with Bobby Hoffman, the casting director's office. They're doing a program. They want to do a show here, episode based on Joni meets Paul in the hospital. She's a candy striper, and he's suffering from exhaustion. So he's in the hospital, and she thinks it's Paul McCartney. She tried to convince you guys it's Paul McCartney. So they want to know. And I told them, I said, well, if you want to get a guy that looks like Paul, then you should be talking to Mitch Weissman. Yeah. So I get on the phone. We talk about the whole thing. They knew who I was, and I got the role. At the time, I was actually musical directing and supervising a show called Lennon off Broadway, which came over from the Everyman Theater in Liverpool, and I was supervising, and I was understudying the McCartney role because I didn't want to be McCartney in that show. It's a show about John Lennon's life from childhood all the way through till the end. And I was doing that show, so Greg Martin, the guy who played Ringo and the other roles that I was understudying, promised not to hurt himself. Greg Martin, by the way, was George Martin's son.
Wow!
Is still George Martin's son.
Yeah.
He got the show by not telling anybody who he was. Then he got into the show. He said, "My dad is George," and George came down and had a big conversation with all of us at rehearsals above Radio City Music Hall.
Wow.
It was really great. That's when I first met him. But anyway, not to digress some more. I get the call, and they fly me out.
You're avoiding answering this question, aren't you?
Yeah, we do Joni Loves Chachi. It was great. It was a fantastic, memorable experience. I remember being shown over that. I guess it was Laverne. What's it? Laverne and Shirley.
Penny Marshall.
Penny Marshall came over to get me to take me over to the Laverne and Shirley set. I remember it was surreal. You're sitting in the commissary, and there's Sylvester Stallone with fake blood on his arm and whatever. Everybody's eating lunch. It was quite amazing. I became friends with Gary Marshall back then. We're just acquaintances. Years later, he remembered the experience and had a nice sort of interview session with a bunch of people. He actually told people a story about that, how this kid was great, so he was a very nice guy. And so, yeah, that's how I did Joni Loves Chachi. And they offered me Paramount actually offered me a player's deal, like a studio contract, and ABC. And I turned it down because my dad, amidst all this stuff that was going on, my dad was fighting liver cancer. And I couldn't see myself relocating out to California, even though he kept saying, go, go, go. So I actually didn't take the contract deal. And they understood totally. And, it changed the course of history. Who knows what would have happened. I really would love to have done episodic television like Al did.
Yeah, oh my God, no kidding.
It would have been a lot of fun.
You could have been killed by Tony Soprano.
I could have been. Exactly. I could play a lot of Italian roles. A Jewish kid, Italian kid, same thing. Whatever. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, listen, Mitch, this has been fun. This has been fantastic. Really enjoyed this. This is the nice birthday present for me to get to talk to you.
Well, happy birthday, exactly.
What are you going to get me?
I don't know. We'll have to. When's your birthday?
Yeah,
I'm talking to Rick. I'm
September.
I'm not expecting anything from you. I'm expecting it from Rick.
I want Gene Simmons to call.
Right. Scott Payne will bust, baby.
Yeah, really. All right, I'll try to talk to Scott. He hasn't talked to me in years.
Yeah, you know what?
Probably thinks I'm a full-blown Democrat.
Yeah. We'll keep Scott out of it. Anybody else would be great, but Scott Baio, you can keep him out of it. That's fine.
But thank you, Mitch, for doing this.
By the way, I love the name. The name of the podcast is Minutia Men, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Right.
All right, I love it because I did an interview with some other guys once on a podcast. They said, "Boy, is he full of minutia."
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So I have plenty of it. So I'm finally on the right podcast.
Yes, you are.
Well, this has been great, and let's keep in touch whenever you're in Chicago.
Yeah, and if we have to escape to Canada, we'll stop at your house on the way there.
Yeah. All right, that sounds good. I can plenty of room. All right, guys.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, man.
Have a good
so
one.
much.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
That was
Mitch
awesome.
Weissman. Yeah, I enjoyed that. Just imagine sitting on the front step with John and Yoko. I mean, I couldn't think of anything else when we were talking to him. He's like, "Hey, would you like to come up for some tea?"
No, I'm busy.
Nah.
Yeah,
Oh,
traffic,
boy.
and
yeah, please.
MacGyver's on at 7.
Right.
I
Well,
gotta
what kind
go.
of tea you got? Yeah. Well, thanks very much to Mitch, and thank you, Dave, for this nice.
Happy birthday.
All right, so I've got to get someone for you now.
Right.
All right, I'm
Has to be
working
who
on it.
related.
Has to be who related.
No, it doesn't have to be.
Okay. All right, I'll think of something.
Okay.
We have people to thank. First of all, we should thank our executive producer, Tony Lasana, with opishows.com. Opie is hippo backwards. OPPIH shows.com. We're distributed by Ed Silla with Radio Misfits. Great Talk Radio isn't dead. It just moved to a better place. RadioMisfits.com. And we'll be back again soon with another episode of
Minutia Man Celebrity Interview.
The preceding was a presentation of Opie Productions. Find our other great shows wherever you find podcasts, including opishows.com. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?